I recently made a video talking about all of the different types of materials that can be used to build raised garden beds. And in this video, I want to expand a bit more on that and talk more specifics on wooden beds. Talk about what type of wood is best to use and some tips if you plan on building some wooden planter beds yourself. So stick around and we'll talk all about it. In general, wood is a really great option for raised bed planters. But the thing about wood is that it decays over time when it's in contact with soil and exposed to the elements. It's eaten up by fungus and insects, but that process affects some species of wood more rapidly than others. And with the expensive wood, you want to make sure that you use something that will last. Now here is a listing of all the types of wood that are good to use for planters in the order that I think is best. Feel free to add a comment if you disagree with any of the things that are in my list. Now, redwood is probably one of the best. It's very rot resistant and it's also resistant to insect attack. It's often used for outdoor play sets, decks, and outdoor furniture. The downside though is it can be very expensive, but planters made from redwood can last 30 plus years. Most home centers, at least the places near me, don't sell redwood, and so you may have to special order it if that's a material you decide to work with. Eastern red cedar and western red cedar are both great options as well. While they're both called cedars, neither of them is a true cedar. Eastern red cedar is actually a juniper, and western red cedar is actually a cypress. I made a whole video about cedar if you want to check it out here. Both of these woods are resistant to decay and insect attack and will last 20 to 30 years in the ground. If you're using either of these trees, just be careful to use as much of the heartwood as you possibly can, as the outer layers or sapwood is not as durable. Other durable woods to use are cypress, Douglas fir, larch. Larch is not usually commercially available, but it can be found in the Northeast US and Eastern Canada. In fact, I picked up some larch at the Amish sawmill that I visited when I lived in Pennsylvania. Eastern hemlock is another good option, but it's also generally only available in the Northeast. Black locust is very durable, but it's also not commercially available. They do grow in parts of the South and Midwest and can sometimes be available at a local sawyer. And they don't grow really huge, those trees, but there definitely is some lumber that's usable and could be some great garden beds. There are a few others like chestnut or catalpa, but again, they're not always available commercially, and it really depends on where you live. Honestly, the easiest lumber to find for most people is probably going to be western red cedar. And that's because they sell it at places like Lowe's and Home Depot. But I would say never buy it from Lowe's and Home Depot. And the reason is because it's very expensive from there. You'll usually get a much better deal if you go to a local sawyer or if you go to a specialty lumber yard and order it from them. Honestly, almost any kind of wood could work, even just regular old pine 2x4s that you find at the home center. It is really just a question about how long you want your planters to last. Pine planters without any treatment will really start to fall apart within just a couple of years. And so with the expensive wood, you really want to use something that's going to last. Now, I have heard of people using other woods like walnut for planter boxes. Please, for the love, do not use walnut. For no other reason than it is just a beautiful wood and it really should be used to make beautiful furniture and not planter boxes. Now, if you've got a bunch of crappy old walnut on your property that is really ugly and maybe it's been sitting out and you want to use it, great. But beyond that, don't. White oak is also another option. They use white oak a lot for outdoor furniture. It can be good for garden beds, but it does have the potential to leach tannins into your soil. Now, it's not going to hurt you, and it's probably not going to hurt your plants, but it can raise the acidity level of your soil. And so you want to be careful of that. But also, white oak is something that should be used to build beautiful furniture like walnut. So, don't use it. Now, with that said, there are definitely some woods that should be avoided at all costs. Now, one of those is railroad ties. Railroad ties, a lot of times are not hard to find, but they're treated with creosote, and that is toxic to humans. Now, I've seen them used in outdoor landscaping, and that's fine, but you really just don't want it near a place that's going to come into contact with vegetables or food that you're growing that you plan on eating. I would also avoid old pallets. Now, I'm sure some of you are going to disagree with me here. Pallets are a really attractive option because they're usually free, but they can be labor intensive to take apart. They can be treated sometimes with chemicals. You don't know what was shipped on wood pallets. They could have had stuff spilled on them. It's in my opinion, it's an option to avoid. But if you really do want to use pallets, you can. I did make a video a while back about some things to look for when you're using wood pallets. And so that's a great video to check out if you want to see or find ways to get the best wood pallets. So now to the big question, and something that I think a lot of people wonder about, and that is, what about pressure treated wood? Now, first of all, treated lumber is wood, usually pine, that's been treated with chemicals to make it more resistant to rot and water damage. This kind of wood is used in home building in places where wood is in contact with cement and could absorb moisture. Now, when you say something's treated with chemicals, the first thing you think is, well, that's something I want to avoid. And you'd be right about 20 years ago, because back then they used to treat lumber with something that was called chromated copper arsenate, or CCA. CCA treated wood was actually banned in 2003, so if you're using old treated lumber, there's a risk that arsenic could be leached from the wood. Today, most pressure treated lumber is treated with something called alkaline copper quaternary. It's water-based and is not considered an environmental or health concern. So yes, you can use pressure treated lumber for your raised bed planters, and it can last 20 to 40 years depending upon your climate. One last tip on wooden planters is that whatever wood you use, the thicker the better. The thicker the wood is, the longer it's going to last. I've seen some pretty thick wooden garden beds out there, and that's great. And if you really want it to last, that's a good thing to use. Now, it's not always available. In fact, I built some planter boxes recently. Mine are an inch thick. And I think that's great. If you can go even thicker, that's great too. Most 2x4s or pressure treated lumber is going to be 1.5 inches thick, 2x4s you find. And so that's all great to use. But if you can get something that's 2 inches thick, 3 inches thick, 4 inches thick, depending upon the space that you have, there's some limitations to that too, but it can be great because it'll last even longer. One last thing on wooden planter beds, and that is staining. You should always stain them before you install them. This will help make sure that they last as long as possible. There are a bunch of non-toxic products on the market. In the past, I've used raw linseed oil and cedar garden bed oil, and they've worked pretty well. And so I'll leave some links to those products below if you want to check them out. So what have you decided? Let me know in the comments what wood you plan on using for your planter beds, or what woods you have used in the past and how they've held up over time. Let me know. Now, these are the raised planter beds that I recently built. I used Eastern red cedar because it's plentiful and easy to find here in Texas. Now, the wood that you choose will depend upon your situation, your budget, your climate, what woods are available in your area, but I hope that I've given you some ideas and tips that'll help you in your raised planter bed project. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Also, be sure to give me a like if you enjoyed the video. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.